And when you meet upon the road, to kill the time, throw down your load.
Now last night I lay sleeping, and I was thinking to myself.
I was just waking up.
Last night I lay sleeping, baby, and I was thinking to myself, thinking when the sun goes down, well, goodbye, old sweethearts and pals. Yes, I'm going away, and I may be back to see you again some old rainy day. Well, in the evening, baby, when the sun goes down, when the sun goes down.
I was just waking up when the front tyre went. At the same time, a horse appeared, the headlights blew, and the horizon came through the windshield. I kissed Earth a kit and left the road like a jumbo jet diving into a swamp. Sometime later, I regained a level of consciousness more likely than the one I'd just left. I'd seen some strange movies on the inside of my eyelids again, and now I was wide awake. But I couldn't be sure.
Do you realize that Bob Menzies now knows what really happened to Harold Hope?
There are a lot of answers to question. If travel really broadened the mind, then why send astronauts into outer space, when for half the price they could send heads of state into inner space? It just didn't make sense. Millions of years ago, when man first crawled out of the sea.
Was he wearing a bathing suit? There are a lot of answers to question.
It was the radio.
It didn't make sense.
Blue flashes shot out of the radio as I fishtailed out of the creek, clawed through the Lantana and whipped back onto the Bruce. Heading south and driving all night, Brisbane to Sydney. Travelling low and close to the sky. Glancing up at palm tree silhouettes like giant swizzle sticks in a Bioki Peterson cocktail. There are many reasons for leaving Brisbane and no time like the present, on a trip that's being driven every night from Townsville to Tumut, Gundagai to Sirius, Rangoon to Grafton. From one side of your face to the other. I folded the Shell Road map into a 12-inch square, reducing the New South Wales coastline to a glance, and then lit up an Arnott Scotch finger biscuit. I placed the shock absorbers on automatic pilot and took out my attache case containing the night driving brain that helped me see round corners, pink dots, across oceans and down wombat holes.
Now you at home won't wanna be, but come hunting thrice to this country. 16,000 miles you've come to hawk about a blanket drum. And when you meet upon the road, to kill the time, throw down your load. It's up the sun, you give a look, it'll soon be time to see the cook. Go around, dubba-rubba-dubba-dub, we'll drive them back to the lively stuff.
When the night comes down around your collar and the road starts coming up through your headlights, familiar landscape suddenly isn't.
It's dream time in the land of legends. And somewhere out there, Henry Lawson's taking another swing.
It was the radio.
Inside the car, I'm making final adjustments to the viewing screen. A Holden windshield where tonight's travel thriller is being shown at 70 miles per hour. Not so much the cars that ate Paris.
Or the jellyfish that followed Cobb's Harbour.
It was going to be a good trip. I pressed my foot against the roof and screamed.
It was the radio.
Eartha Kitt cooled off while the low spark of the high heel boys took the edge off tweed heads and the lights of Murwillumbah disappeared in the rearview mirror. I made myself comfortable and a short time later saw Halley's Comet pass 3 times to the east. Mount Warning flashed a message, and pretty soon I was in Rangoon, trying to master the art of being powerless and completely stupid. The only way to travel. Collapsing into a coma and running off the road had already proved too easy, so I placed one eye on the road, one in Rangoon, and the other on a box of Darrell Lee chocolates that I was quietly quaffing at the Rangoon Bowling Club, having just filled up with Total at Brunswick Head. The hills were alive with the sound of snorting truckies, and I was just beginning to lay back and enjoy it when I heard a noise like a sunbeam lady shaver in reverse and looked out to see some poor schizoid drive out of a creek and disappear backwards up the road. His laugh looked a lot like mine, but I knew it wasn't me. Nobody from Sydney could laugh that long. An all-night pit stop loomed about 50 years up the road, but there was also something on the back seat. Moving and curling, reaching out with long, dark fingers, gripping my throat, twisting my toes and pounding my ears into the dashboard.
What was the radio? The transcendental masturbation unit on my shoulders began to show more interest in a floating SO sign, so I drifted back from Rangoon in time to take milk with my coffee.
Where was I? Highway 1, Y50. Is my board still on board? Was there a bomb on board? Was I on board?
Am I neurotic or just low on gas? I couldn't be sure. I reached for the map but never quite made it. Where was I? I couldn't be sure. I reached for the map but never quite made it. But I couldn't be sure. It just didn't make sense.
Followed the curve in my neck, and through the back window I saw the Southern Cross, neatly intercepted by the Grafton signpost. Grafton! I screamed twice. Europe was never like this. Grafton and Rangoon don't mix even with a limp. It might be a nice place for acid casualties to retire, but getting through Grafton at night is like chasing the Min-Min light through the crossroads of credibility. Luckily, I was travelling with my cat. And as every good traveller knows, a cat contributes to the psychic kitty. Dogs are useful travelling companions when you want advance warning of natural disasters like volcanic eruptions, floating boat sheds, and second comings. But cats work the other way.
From the inside out.
I hit the radio.
You may find us on your TV because it makes you not know when we talk to you on.
The hair on the back of my cat fell out.
Talk to you on. Talk to you on
It was Harry Belafonte. I knew cats can't stand reggae. It confuses them. They mince around looking all Egyptian, trying to walk sideways, but not really getting anywhere. I killed the radio and put the cat out. Above in the murderous fog, I could just make out the semi-monotonous drone of one of Her Majesty's Burmese warriors. It was Group Captain Sir Douglas Bader. The mighty legless flyer was circling hopelessly, the motor of his sawn-off Spitfire gurgling like a didgeridoo in mud, searching for the blacked-out flying field where Burmese dope runners lay concealed by the paranoia in the air and the hash resin in their eyes. Hail Douglas in articulo mortis. It was time to go over the top. A month on the the floor and I was ready for bed when the phone in my foot rang. It was the DAB, the RSL, the CSIRO, and the man from the Psychedelicatessen all raving in poodle Spanish.
Take your own brains to the cleaners, Mohammed.
I screamed and locked the passenger side door. Worse, the leg was coming through the windshield. An arm appeared, followed by a torso and finally a face. I recognized it instantly as Dr. Timothy Leary, who was on the outside looking in. I'm the man most likely to discover immortality and good surf on the south side, he said. Don't talk to me about schizophrenia, Tim, I replied. I'm still alive, even as I write this. Rock and roll was dead as I tuned up the dial and hit the roof. The radio left off its deathbed on the back seat, rolling stones twitching in the static. But the penetrating bounce of its signal couldn't cut the cryogenital state of Australian broadcasting, so I flicked the switch and the dizzy monster slithered back into its speaker box.
What's all this got to do with Grafton?
About as much as 1978's got to do with Disneyland.
There must be some way out of here. There must be some way out of here.
Rangoon and early next week in Grafton. Full moon and piercing as I slammed into neutral and went for it. Where was I and when was it? Where was I and when was it? Where have all the dingoes gone? This is the age of spoof, and Australia's not on the map. A cassette fell into place, and Jimi Hendrix bent back the night. There must be some way out of here. So the Joker is a thief. Go, Jimmy. Snakes were cold. The air was frozen still. A Mullumbimby moon and an Arctic white Holden gliding south through northern New South Wales, slicing through a sea of stars where green-tinged jellyfish hovered in the headlights, tentacles bristling in the breeze. Out over the silvered hills, enormous manta rays streaked through the night sky, like hang gliders returning to Byron Bay. Rangoon swam into focus, but my concentration had flown out the window. My foot was asleep and travelling at twice the speed of lead. Ghost gums flickered by at blur speed. The car slid around a curve, and what looked like several realities at once came crashing through the glass. The full moon hung right above the steering wheel, not saying a word.
The monk laughs at the moon, and everybody 10 miles around in all directions wonders why. He's just reminding them of what? Of the moon, the old dumb moon of a million lives. Possum looked up, looked through me, and was gone. A flash of water, eyes that glint like beer cans on the side of the road. Everything went by so rapidly that I had scarcely the power of observation. Blur had set in. Brought me back to the viewing screen. It had drifted out of focus. My eyes swam before the instrument panel like a short-sighted projectionist at a drive-in movie. I reeled in my mind and wound up the window, fishing in the glove box for another slide from my prized collection of sunsets. I was just about to throw one up when the grin on my face cracked, and I tried to laugh as I saw the flashing blue light in the rear-view mirror. 1 in progress.
The odds of being rattled by the Thought Patrol on the New England highway at night are lower than crashing immortality by square rooting death with blind mathematics. But the coastal route's more dense, and so are the cops. Explain a packet of verbal tea to a reincarnation of Broderick Crawford is not easy, especially when you've just smoked your last joint. 3 o'clock in the morning, this guy was still wearing sunglasses, and an aura of evil surrounded his hawk-like head for a distance of 15 feet. Interrogation by torch and small chat about what really went on at Griffith did nothing to unsettle my mind. I was in Rangoon and left it to that celebrated media mind fixer, Colonel Buck Keepfit Chudley, to remind Constable Malloy of Maxwell that there is such a thing as crank mail in reverse. The Army knows only too well the searing bite of this merciless maxim. Each time they lodge recruitment advertisements in the newspapers, Colonel Chudley replies with a coupon reminding them that
military intelligence is a contradiction of terms.
I waved goodbye, jumped back in the car, and got down to the serious business of getting out of there. I was trying to put as much space between Rangoon and Grafton as possible. All of a sudden, the cat screamed and the CB barked. I was trained in nerve warfare, so I barked at the cat and screamed at the CB. It was my good buddies, Flight Lieutenant Tutankhamun and Sergeant Footman of the Egyptian Air Force.
How's your cat?
They inquired. Not out, I returned. We continued to exchange mixed pleasantries and ripe abuse in a lengthy stream of misleading cosmic platitudes. Hasn't the weather been strange lately? I parried.
Not as strange as it's going to get.
I agreed to attend the Rangoon Used Planet sale during the Rocktober equinox and signed off as the radio aerial came to rest against the extended foot of a leering mutant who was hitching a ride.
Drive me to distraction.
He was a refugee from the Al Capone School of Advanced Punk. His head was separated from the neck and his eyes looked both ways before crossing.
Drive me to distraction.
You're on, I said. Hasn't the weather been strange lately? How's your cat? Get out and close the door. Under his army fatigues, he wore a gimpy Cowgirls Cooperative T-shirt, and his lapel sported a foot power button that glowed in the dark. I've just done some speed, he purred. I'm heading for Sydney. Couldn't be a better place, I screamed and drove off in a cloud of figure eights. He didn't say another word for 5 hours. And during the night, we developed a good friendship based on the tacit understanding that neither of us played neurological crosswords. We were so off our face that instead of talking, the eyes and the side of our head exchanged data. Occasionally, I heard his neurons whir like a flock of Major Mitchell. Each time this happened, I wound the window down and screamed at the jellyfish circling lazily above the speeding bonnet. Here, Judith. Nice boy, Brian. Come on, Neville. His eyes continued to strike out across the moonscape, and in the end, I left him to his own vision of Pompeii. The sound of bolting doors was all that echoed from his ears. He was the perfect hitchhiker, entertaining but mute in the right places. And he never once complained about the steel girder of static satire that was masquerading as 2JJ's program from the speaker boxes on the back seat. I think he even got a kick from the jumper leads I'd rigged up under the dash. He attached the positive to his forehead and then stuck the negative in his mouth before jerking around the front seat like a vegetarian in a butcher's cold room. hours later, he fell back in the seat, revealing his face. A simultaneous manifestation of love and fear. Purple powder burns shaded his eyes. He looked like he'd been standing on a dole queue all his life. But before I could tear myself in two, I was back in Rangoon. Who's next? I gave the market cry. Get back, I screamed. I'm an Australian. I knew this was a pretty lame excuse and prepared myself for the truth. Australia is merely an island of Antarctica, came the voice, and of no further significance. Suddenly, I understood the secret of Atlantis. I left the markets and wandered down to the Smoky Weather Club, where the black and blue minstrels were appearing in the Burnt Toast Cabaret show. There was always a surfeit of Afghan hounds at the Smoky Weather Club, sitting around, smoking cricket balls and reading the Burmese edition of Uranus Monthly. This was the real Rangoon. But instead of hanging out playing musical brains with Agnostics Anonymous, I had run into my old confidant, the Governor-General of Her Majesty's Fish Tank, Commodore Lord Deborah Rolador Dari, famous telecom Indian wrestler. The only lord alive who could Indian wrestle by telephone. He had Uri Geller eating out of his head. It was time for a growl and a perfect chance to casually drop the name of a good restaurant. The Toast of Rangoon is a little place where they serve toast in a shoebox and a plaster Paris cat named Bruce plays Eno on the piano. Lord Deborah had the toast du jour, and I had flaming blue bottles served under glass. Not recommended for eating or staring at longer than it takes to realize that what's Rangoon to you is Grafton to me. A dark hour, an hour before dawn, and atop the Great Divide, early morning planets were rising before the sun. message to Betelgeuse and waited for a reply. Through the frozen shadows, ash-covered aboriginals crowded the smouldering embers of their campfire, the moon almost gone. Sometime later, I was sitting under a tree on the road to Rome. A fellow traveller buckled his sandal. I merely nodded and filled my pipe. It was time for the news. All over the country, breakfast announcers were racing to their studios. The midnight to dawn show asleep on the back seat. It's time for the news. I put through a call to the ABC's person in Rangoon, but she was out to lunch with Genghis Khan. I needed someone to talk to, and not necessarily human. The operator was a recording, but said Eric von Daniken was on the same wavelength, riding neon tubes in Greenland, and was I crazy enough to speak with him? Eric and I had little to say to one another, but I quizzed him about the Ida Buttrose conspiracy and served sublime questions about agnosticism until I got too much interference on my nervous system and told von Daniken he was hung up on jellyfish. He thanked me for the insight and signed off in English. Back to the Major Judith Kidney Motel for breakfast, where I found the half-dressed but fully whacked flying Zucchini brothers performing a human pyramid in the lobby, accompanied by the cheers of Princess Dog of Queensland, who was touring the middle universe in anticipation of the return of you-know-who. I screamed, and passed the joint. This brought the house down, and the flying Zucchini brothers as well. There was no sense in waiting around for kudos, so as soon as the dust cleared, I headed straight for the breakfast room with the Princess Dog, who was still loitering in the lobby. The Major was serving breakfast, and I told him that his sand shears were on fire. Quick as a flash, he returned the fire. I rolled under the table as Princess Dog went up in a cloud of muesli.
You know me.
Ask me a bowl of parachute bonnet. I had a rough night's sleep and was in a semi-detached two-dimensional frame of mind, which is where I live most of the time. But the roof had sprung a leak, and I'd woken up with this strange bone growing out of the top of my head. On the way to the bathroom mirror, I ran into the famous and fashionable mind juicer, Carl C. Jung, who was standing on the fridge out of milk and out of breath. "What's it all mean, Carl?" I screamed. "I'm glad you asked," he replied. "Your readers have been dying to know." Eric von Daniken had just rung him to say that I was cute but crazy, and I was unprepared for what Carl had to say. It's your dorsal fin, he said. You're turning into a shark. Jungian notions cover a great deal of whatever the hell is going on, but not all of it. Jung was brilliantly right in saying in the 1950s that the flying saucer phenomenon would become an important spiritual and religious transformation of humanity.
Bird encounters of a close kind.
Blur had set in. A knock on the roof brought me back to the viewing screen. Close encounters of a blurred kind, indeed.
Keep